Hi, my name is Rebecca Martinez. 6 of my 10 leadership roles were first-time positions. Join me on TTalks to learn how I effectively managed my own career development and worked through risk to end up in a VP position.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of TTalks, where we dive into the stories behind the leaders shaping our world. I'm your host, TJ Walia. Rebecca has become a pivotal figure in Softchoice's thriving culture, demonstrating a commitment to nurturing outstanding workplace environments during her 16-year tenure. As Vice President of Account Management, she is known for a unique leadership approach that enhances her team's strengths and drives both professional and personal development. Her approach has resulted in remarkable retention and customer satisfaction rates along with leadership recognition. Passionate about shaping a corporate culture that values everyone, she is a supporter of employee resource groups, particularly advancing initiatives for working mothers, exemplifying a leadership ethos centered on empowerment, inclusivity, and putting people first. Rebecca, welcome to TTalks.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited that you asked.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you, Rebecca. And of course, we would ask. I've known you for a very long time, and you've done some great things in the leadership space. So, we'll probably jump right into it from that perspective. You've had 10 leadership positions within 16 years. I mean, that says a lot. It's like you get your hands around one, and then all of a sudden you're moving on to the next one. Well, first of all, did you not like all the roles you were in, or was there, a transition and a natural progression through all that? I'd love to understand that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I wish I could say that it was really intentional, prescriptive career development, but it wasn't that. I have always approached my career not from a 5-year plan where I knew the title I wanted next, but I always have a long-term perspective on the impact I want to make. And it's just happened very organically that as I have acquired experience, as I've expanded my network, and as I've built a brand and experience specifically within Softchoice, there's just always been an opportunity as the business has evolved to continue expanding my own experience, to continue growing a team, which means taking on a new title, to absorb additional responsibility, which might elevate in a different way. I feel very fortunate that Softchoice is an organization, and it's one of the primary reasons I've stayed there happily and excitedly for 16 years, is it is a company that is very focused on career progression and growing internal talent. So it's one of those organizations that as long as you are leaning in, and as long as you have an idea of where you want to go, there's a lot of opportunity to get there. One fun fact that I didn't even land on until very recently as I was going through my own resume is out of those 10 leadership positions, 6 of them are titles that I'm the first person to ever hold them, including the position that I'm currently in, VP of Account Management. This is the first time we've ever structured the team this way and had a VP with that specific title. And I feel really fortunate, not only because it has proved opportunity and progression for myself, but it really shows that the organization is willing to evolve and they're willing to adapt their style and their model and their team structure to accommodate what's happening in the industry and to provide that competitive and cultural advantage, which is awesome.
That's quite interesting, Rebecca. And as you were speaking, and you talked about the two things, one is new roles that are built out of thin air, essentially, but to have impact. But then that goes back to your vision or your planning. It's not the typical, what are you going to do in 5 years, or what do you want to be in 5 years? It's impact driven. So I don't think it's a fluke that this happened, but I think you started looking at the impact you want to have. And when you didn't see that within the roles you were at, you decided to create new roles. Tell me a bit more about that. I'm really curious about that.
Well, it's not so much even that I intended to create roles. It's just there was a real organic evolution of the company. And I found ways where I could insert myself where it was, hey, I feel like I can continue to grow the team to have this lasting impact. Or, I know the company is looking to, one of the largest shifts that I made in my career was I did one small stint where it's the only time I've left sales, but I did move to an operations-based role under our VP of operations to build out a customer support pillar. And that was really bred just based off of the needs of the business at the time. But I had some specialized knowledge of the role. I'd been working very closely with individuals in a like role. So I knew that there were skills that I had that would really not only optimize how we built out that pillar within the organization, but the understanding that I had of the role would give me enough credibility with the people having to make that transition that they would have more confidence in that shift. And a lot of my leadership approach is very empathy driven. It's completely cultural driven. I know how hard it is to be part of a large organization going through large change. And it's a lot easier to go through that change when there's someone, steering that ship who has the experience where you're like, they see me, they understand what I'm going through. And in that situation, it was something where no one was currently in that role. It didn't exist, but I knew if I put up my hand, I had experience that would help make that change more effective. It would happen a little smoothly and with a lot more buy-in from the frontline employees that were having to make that transition with me. So I'm sorry, I don't know if that fully answered your question.
It does, and it gives us.
I think I detoured a little bit.
It does, but it gives us context in terms of how that's evolving. But again, it ties back to your impact, right? So you're really impact driven in terms of the change you want to have, and it shows that you vested yourself into your career, into the organization that you're representing. And that's what's allowing you to build this impact. Otherwise, a lot of people look at their journey as, well, I want to be this role or this title, and then I want to be this title, and they use them as stepping stones and they get, move along. But along that way, they don't have the same level of impact because they're not thinking outside the box. And I think that's what I'm, capturing from this, whether you say it that way or not, but I think that's what it is. The outside box thinking, it's seeing there's a need to grow the business and to grow the organization, essentially.
Yeah, I appreciate that you've highlighted, and I kind of didn't mean to go intentionally in this direction, but it is very much based off of, I find the impact that I want to have with the organization, the impact I want to have on our culture, the influence that I want to leave with a lot of our frontline employees. I just have realized that the larger table I'm sitting at, the larger that sphere of influence. And I'm always someone who, from the very start in my career, I remember putting up my hands and being part of stretch assignments and stretch projects, literally ground zero in my career at Softchoice, because I'm just someone, when I see a problem, when I see someone struggling, when I see something being bumpier than it should be, when I see people solving for the symptom and not the root cause, like, I use this term with my team a lot and they always laugh at me, but I'm like, it makes my brain itchy. It's like, I'm just like, no, it's like something's just like niggling, and I got to get in there. I got to fix it. And I've just found that as I've acquired this experience, as I've been able to progress from a title perspective at Softchoice, but as I've been able to grow my sphere of influence, I've been able to grow the sphere of influence for the solve and for the cultural impact. And that for me is the bigger deal than, the title that comes with the progression.
And when I look at it from that perspective, you're breaking barriers, right? You're breaking barriers that are going beyond what the conventional ways of doing things are. Being a female leader, has that held any resistance or had any resistance for you? Or are there different ways that you've navigated or you've learned to navigate through that? I'd love to understand that as well.
Well, there's no doubt that there has been resistance. I'd say it's a combination of resistance and just fighting kind of standardized stereotype and perspective. I feel like there's a lot of people very hardwired that, since they are leading successfully with their personality and their approach, that must be the right way to do it. And that has been one of the most challenging, whether it be stereotype, microaggression, I'm not sure what bucket it falls into. But I've gotten a lot of coaching, both solicited and unsolicited, throughout my career around more the stylistic approach. And it's a type of coaching that does not always, not even does not always, is not usually traditionally given to men. A lot of emotions-based coaching and what I'm bringing into the role and how I'm engaging with my people. But I'll be honest, that's the thing that helps me lead the most authentically. I'm hesitating because I'm not going to remember the quote exactly, but to bring in a bit of a pop culture reference, because I know it was a huge moment, but over the last summer, the Barbie movie, there's one line that like lawyer Barbie or someone says, where it's like, I'm able to hold my emotions and logical thought in the same space and work very effectively just because I am able to. And I know that is probably one of the largest coaching challenges that I have received, but also the thing that has allowed me to mobilize into these roles the most effectively is my ability to maintain high empathy, connect with the real world experience, understand what true EX is at that moment with all the variables, to think ahead about not just what the message is, but what's that impact going to be? How is it going to be received? What do I need to factor in to make this change, this move, this team shift of strategy, whatever it is we're trying to approach? I always build my plan from the human element up. How is this going to be received? And now that I'm in a vice president's position, I find that it's inverted. I will start with the business outcome, but I'll always still reverse engineer back down to how is this going to be received? How are we going to facilitate this change? What does the messaging need to look like? How are we going to communicate? And so while I found it to be the thing that facilitates the most growth for myself, the thing that has facilitated probably the highest level of credibility with my team, it's oddly been the thing that I have received the most amount of feedback around is just the level of passion, how connected I am with my frontline employees. I find often with individuals who are a little more heavy-handed as they move through the business, for a long time on the Gallup leadership strengths, it's shuffled around a little bit, but the very first time I ever did it, my number one strength was harmony. And I found that I have a real strength for mediation and conflict resolution, but often when they see me mediating and trying to work through things in a constructive way, it can be seen as conflict avoidance, just because I'm not jumping in right away, trying to be a little bit more heavy-handed. And I've had to be very conscious with not diminishing their perspective, but really retraining how they're thinking of the situation and trying to reframe my approach so they see, just because you see me avoiding conflict, I see me leading in from a point of mediation. So moving through all these changes, I find less even just as a woman, but as myself. But I do find, because I naturally as myself tend to be a emotional, empathetic individual, those have not always been highly regarded, well-received traits within the corporate landscape. So figuring out how do I embrace those to lead very authentically as myself and not compromise the way I engage with my employees, with my work peers, how I make decisions, but still convey real confidence in that decision-making process and in my ability to lead through change and through challenge.
It's so powerful what you're saying there, and there's so many stereotypes that have been built in terms of how we operate, how we don't. I look at all these situations as being very individual, right? Everyone has a different way of leading, different way of conveying a message, different way of reacting, and that's all given by the environments they've been raised in, the environments they've been managed under. Like, there's so many factors to it, and I always go back to, like, if we were to close our eyes and just hear a robotic voice giving that message without being able to identify if it's coming from a male or a female, a racial person or not, just the message, how would we convey that differently? So why do we add all of these layers of complexity for no reason, because of who the message is coming from rather than what the message is, right? And that's where I think we have to overcome. And I've seen it myself as well, of being an individual who looks a certain way, that there are challenges. And I've seen it so many times where people make assumptions based on what I'm going to sound like, but having been a Canadian, I don't sound like the average person who's just come from India or has come from India with an accent. It throws them off. And I've had people even confront me and say that and say, I didn't think you were going to sound like that. And I'm like, what does that even mean, right? So it gets very interesting, but it shouldn't devalue what the knowledge, the message, and the impact the individual has. Sadly, it does, right?
I could not agree with you more. Absolutely. And it part of also why I've tried very intentionally throughout my career growth, fully embracing and understanding that I do need to add, whether it be a level of filter, a level of elevation in how I am communicating and engaging with the business as I have elevated my position at Softchoice. I understand that I cannot be the same employee. There is a level of professional evolution that has to happen. But coming to, whether it be executive meetings or to my team authentically as myself, has been so important. we talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and making sure that there's equal representation across, the corporate executive board and across the leadership team and across our frontline employees. And for me, that has to be more than just visible diversity as well. I want people with different natural strengths and different competencies. I want people who process information and communicate differently than other people on our leadership team. And I think it's very important that, even if it means maybe the conversation goes on a little bit longer because we have different communication styles, we're probably also addressing many issues or communicating in a way that's going to hit with our frontline employees much more effectively, because you have people considering different perspectives and considering the emotional and considering the frontline experience. So I think it moves us closer to true kind of human and inspiring leadership across the cultural norm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And through all of this challenging decision making that you have to go through, and that's something I want to touch on as well, is the decision making element of it. Because in leadership, you have to look at so many different factors, and we've kind of touched on some of these there, from what individuals, how they respond, whether it's logical, emotionally, etc. What is your strategy when you're making tough decisions, especially the ones under pressure? How do you go about navigating through those challenges and those tough decisions?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, like I said, harmony used to be one of my top strengths on Gallup leadership strengths. I'm also, I don't buy into the whole astrological thing. I am a Libra, and I am unbelievably so a very stereotypical Libra. So I think just balance in general just constantly shows up in my life. And I take all of my decision making with a very similar approach. I would say, if anything, I feel the most challenged when I'm trying to work through a decision at work or work through a challenge with someone at work who has a very one-sided approach to decision making. If they're very, very qualitative or they're very quantitative, I feel like you're missing a piece of the puzzle. So I personally take a very balanced approach. I like to look at both the quantitative and the qualitative. I believe it's the most effective lens when you're kind of looking at it like an algebraic equation. You've got your variables, but then you've got your hard data. But without one of those components, you're going to arrive at the wrong answer. So I like to make sure that I'm factoring that all in. I'm pretty big on gathering diverse perspectives, making sure that it's more than just someone with this particular lens feeding into that outcome, especially if it is a very weighty decision or something where there is potentially a large consequence. I want to make sure I've got all potential perspectives factored in. Definitely seek as much information as possible around risk and benefits, because that risk reward comparison has to be factored in every single time. I'm also very transparent, and I communicate a lot. Whenever I'm working through a tough decision, I'm pretty clear on what that decision is and what the desired outcome is. And I'm usually very transparent around my process. I find if you are very collaborative and communicative about your process, I find the end state tends to be more widely accepted and adopted, regardless of what the outcome is, because they understand what that decision-making looked like. They understand who was involved. And I find in general, with whether it be a decision or a process that's implemented at work, something that I talk about a lot with my leadership at work is I see it time and time again. If you leave a void of information, people fill it with their own narrative. And it's very easy for people to assume the worst, feel like their perspective wasn't considered, not know if an impact was considered. So if you are very, very thorough in talking about not just why something's happening, but how it's happening, the people involved, what the impact's going to be, then even if it doesn't work out exactly like people hoped at the end, even if it's an uncomfortable decision, they understand how we got there. They understand how you've considered them and how you're going to support them through it. And I just find that rate of change and that activation is so much more effective.
I really like that, giving individuals the right amount of context, because not everyone's going to want it, but the people that do, you want to make sure those gaps are filled. Yes. And this is one thing I used to do, even when I would send out communication or emails, is I would put the messaging out there, and the messaging would be, short, to the point. This is what's happening. This is the direction we're moving in, etc. But I would also have a little section in the email that would have context. So anyone who wants to read additional context about what's happened, why that decision was made, what was considered, all of that's there. People that want to read it, by all means. The ones that don't, let's move on. But we're moving in this direction is what the ultimate decision is. So I love that.
I adopted Yeah, I adopt the exact same thing, especially if it's it's a finalized decision or it's a real new process that we're outlining. I will summarize it. If it's an email form, a summarized email, this is exactly what's happening. Here's the decision. Here's the general high level why. For those who need more information, read on. And there's been a few times in team meetings as well where I'm like, listen, I'm going to provide some context for the next 2 minutes. If you don't need it, great. Go to a happy place, answer an email. But I know there's a lot of people who do need this context to really connect with that end state and answer some questions. And the last thing I want is people creating their own narrative when there is a real robust process and a lot of thoughtfulness that was put into how we arrived where we did. So I like to connect the dots where possible.
Yeah, it definitely helps, right? Because people don't want to assume that it was a irrational decision, a lot of thought didn't go into it, or they just made this decision they're going to backtrack off of versus, no, we've done the research, we've gone through everything, and here's the decision for it. So it's very important from that. The next area, Rebecca, I want to jump on is work-life balance. I know you're a supporter of employee resource groups or ERGs, especially working mothers. Love to understand how you balance your time and what work-life balance looks like for you as a leader and then for your teams.
Oh man, I think I would be shocked and amazed if I met anyone who said nowadays that like, oh, this is no sweat. This is not a problem. Let me share all my secrets. What I love about this is it's a very real human conversation. And I'll be honest, now in an executive position, I feel it's my responsibility to be open and say, no, like I still don't have this fully figured out. I feel like it is way too easy to look upwards up the corporate chain and just feel like someone must have a ton of help and they must have everything figured out and everything's balanced. No, like I definitely still have days where I wake up and I'm like, well, let's figure out today within today. Like that's my frame of perspective. I will say the one major gift of the pandemic was forcing my workspace into my home space and not having that very clear division really shifted my perspective of how I was looking at balance in general. I feel like prior to the pandemic, there was a real feeling that work-life balance was a legitimate balance, like going back to the Libra and the scales or whatever you want to visualize, where it had to be equal at all times. There was always one or the other, and you felt like everything was getting the equal and appropriate amount of time. And what I found through the pandemic is it's really not, at least for myself, the healthiest approach is not a perfect work-life balance, but it is a really stable and effective work-life blend. It's understanding what are my core priorities, both at work and at home. And as long as I can make sure that I am giving those things enough space when they need them, I'm comfortable with that. The day-to-day balance might not look great. Sometimes even the week-to-week might not look great. But as long as it pans out over time, as long as I can be there for those core moments for my children, and I know that I've got the flexibility to kind of tap out and be there for my family when I need to be, but as well as work, as long as I know I can set the expectations with my family and my partner and just say, no, I'm, to my husband, sorry, I need to be heads down this week, or I'm going to be traveling for work for 5 days. Like being able to embrace that balance isn't a daily balance. It's just an inherent blend of the two responsibilities. And as long as I feel like both pieces are getting enough equity, the time index can blend and shift as much as it needs to arrive at that point. And then from like a working mother perspective, I will add, because I get this question all the time. How do you do it? How do you do it? And it's tough acknowledging that this is my answer, knowing that not everyone is going to have access to this. But I will say the number one tool for me to be a balanced working mother is having an effective partner. My husband is phenomenal. He also has an incredibly stressful full-time job. So it's not like we are in it together, but there is no, primary parenting or primary taking care of the home responsibilities. It is very equitable down the line. Again, with us, it kind of ebbs and flows depending on who needs to take the most lift so the other person can lean more into work. But knowing that I have a husband who does understand the stress I'm under at work, or does understand when my responsibilities are increasing, but then also is very open and honest when he's saying, I've got to lean into work. So we've got to look at our calendars and figure out how we're going to make this work. That has been empowering, both knowing I can be very open and honest with my achievements and know that he's going to celebrate me and support me, but also knowing that I'm okay to ease up when it comes to work and allow him to lean in when need be.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely critical, Rebecca. And you touched on a couple of points there. One is just trying to figure out that balance, right? And there's a misconception that we think that it has to be 50-50, and I'm going to be at work and I'm disconnected, and now I'm at home, and it doesn't work like that. Our brain does not stop thinking. We're constantly going. So you might be, having dinner, but you get a thought that says, hey, I've got to do this for my next campaign or something else or whatever initiative we're doing. We can't turn the brain off to do that. So it has to be a blend. But what you touched on was so important. There are going to be weeks or days where you're all in on work, but then there are going to be weeks or days where you're all in on the family and taking care of, what needs to be taken care of at home. It has to balance out in the long term, but in the short, near-term vision, it may not. And that's what we typically focus on, because when we talk about work-life balance, we're looking at, is half my day spent here and is half my day spent here? And it shouldn't be. It should be overall, the week, the month, the year, and see, what does that look like, right? So that's one aspect of it. But the other, the partner at home, that is absolutely crucial, right? Because without that other significant other helping and stepping in and doing the other parts of the day-to-day, it becomes impossible. And it's hard for single parents, essentially, that we forget about, that they don't get the same type of support, that they can just say, hey, you know what, I'm offline now, or I'm going to disconnect, or I'm going to stop. Can't do that. My wife is just fabulous in terms of stepping in and then doing what she needs to do. We made a deliberate decision just prior to COVID. Luckily, we did. She had her own business, and we saw the impact at home. But she decided to sell the business and say, I want to be spending the time with the kids, because the kids were a lot younger. And we made that decision back then. So we kind of split our responsibilities and roles. But through that, it's that balance that we get. If I had to do all of that, or she had to do all of that, it'd be a nightmare. Right? So it's about getting that synergy with your partner, identifying what we're going to focus on, what our strengths are, and what comes easier to us, and making our lives easier. Like if you ask me to cook, it'd be a nightmare, right? So it's not something I'm going to get into. But she does that aspect of it, but she doesn't want to do the working aspect of it. She's like, I want to spend time with kids. And we split that responsibility that way. So it's very, very reassuring what you're sharing with us through that.
Absolutely. I know I didn't mention it before, but sorry, I was going to say, I know I didn't mention it before, but it's not, I have such incredible admiration for anyone who is working through a situation like myself or working in the corporate space without that partner. Just like I said, I mean, I'm not just so I have 3 boys. I know you know that, but anyone might not know that. And it's just 3 boys and a boy dog. I'm wildly outnumbered. But just I say very honestly, I really don't think I could have done what I have done within my career. I could have leaned in the way I needed to when I did, if I didn't have that support system. So I would, my recommendation would be, it doesn't need to be a husband, a wife, a partner, a romantic spouse, but I, really implore people to find that person, the person you can lean on. You can be honest about your career aspirations, be honest about your balance, and hopefully they can find that individual that can give them the freedom they need to lean in and give them permission to focus on themselves if that's something that they're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. And having the right support, and I've talked about this in some of my videos as well, right? Just, your extended family or your friends, it could be anyone to help offload some of those chaotic moments. And of course, they're not going to come home and cook for you every single day, or, make the bed and do the laundry and go work for you. But if they can help, especially at times of great stress, that's when you're going to count on them, right? The days everything's great. It doesn't matter what it is, right? And you're on top of the world and you can do everything, but it's those days when you're not that you need the support and you need to raise your hand and ask for that help. So, so the next year, Rebecca, I want to touch on is mentorship, right? You kind of mentioned on it and touched on it a couple times through the conversation, but as a leader, how has mentorship impacted your journey, if at all?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, how are you helping others expand and grow in their careers as well as a mentor, if at all?
Yes. Well, I mean, I can address both those questions kind of in one answer, as I do feel very fortunate to have benefited from incredible mentorship as a mentee, but have also learned an immense amount acting as a mentor to many others throughout my career journey. And I will say there's few things that feel more complimentary than when someone reaches out and says, hey, I feel like I can learn from you, or I see experience that you have that I would benefit from. And it's one of the primary reasons that I went into leadership is I have kind of this very pay it forward drive. I see everything that other people have given to me in regards to advice, help, support, mentorship. And I really do love just bringing that forward and making sure that others have access to a similar support system and a similar level of coaching and advice. So I, as a mentee, have definitely benefited through mentorships. And the one advice that I would give to a lot of people looking for a prime mentorship is the number of people that I speak to that feel like, well, I've got a good relationship with my direct manager and, they give me a lot of advice. I'm like, well, that's great. I would hope for that. But not everyone has a great relationship with their direct manager. And even if they do, that direct manager isn't going to know everything about everything you might want to learn or lean into. That person doesn't necessarily have all of the skills to be the perfect mentor in all of the areas you're looking to develop. And I've been in an interesting situation multiple times at Softchoice where I've had a great relationship with every single one of the leaders that I've been paired with. I feel very fortunate about that. But not all of those leaders were my primary mentor. I very often had to reach outside of our kind of coach-employee relationship to seek the mentorship that I personally needed to grow in my career. I think mentorships are also very important because they do bring a very different, not just skill set, but perspective. If I'm looking to expand my influence and my leadership skill set, last thing I want to do is narrow my scope and receive advice or coaching from a singular individual. You want differing perspectives, people with different experience, different segments of the organization. I always like asking, early in my career, I would often ask new people that I was paired with from a mentorship perspective, just to you right now, without us having a conversation, what is my brand? Because it was really, really interesting to hear what they already perceived or thought of me, because that would shape a lot of how we then moved forward in that mentorship, because I could tell, well, where are the gaps that I need to fill for you? What do you need to understand about me? What do you know, or how are you working in your segment that I can use to complement my own skill set and growth? And then as a mentor, like I said, I will always enjoy the pay it forward mentality, but for myself, it's just improving that culture of confidence that leadership is looking to grow within someone's skill development, career development. One of the programs that I've felt very fortunate that I've been able to spin up at Softchoice, being part of our Leading Women's Committee ERG board, was about 4 years ago. Myself and another individual on the board, Sarah Lockhart, created we call it Connections at Softchoice mentorship program specifically for women within the business, because we realized there was mentorship happening, but a lot of it was longer term. And what we're finding is longer term, but lower impact. It was kind of ad hoc meetings, and a lower number of individuals were being put through that program. So we designed this program to pair individuals with mentors, specifically addressing identified soft or hard skill growth that they wanted to achieve within the next 3 to 6 months. So we do these speed round mentorships where, based off of what they're looking to gain experience in or grow, we'll pair them with an expert within Softchoice. It can be someone who is a senior leadership or director level, but it could be just a subject matter expert within that skill. And it's a 3-month mentorship. And I feel very fortunate to not just have helped run the program and spun this up, but also to have put up my hand to be a mentor many, many times through this program, because you meet incredible people from across the organization. And it gives me the opportunity to connect with individuals that I might not have, just especially in this virtual world when you're missing a lot of that coffee pot. I don't know. I was going to say water cooler, but I went to coffee pot. That's a terrible analogy. But just casual work encounters. I don't know. Just I'm meeting way less people naturally being out of the office. And this gives me the opportunity to network with these people much more consciously and help then ideally, if it's a very effective mentorship, become a sponsor for that individual and making sure that I'm bringing their name into conversation and I'm advocating for them when they're not in the room.
Yeah, it's and again, it was loaded with lots of insightful information and nuggets there. But one of the things I did early in my career, even at Microsoft, was like you said, leveraging others outside of your immediate network that would support you. And back, I think it was in 2012, I had a manager who I reported into, loved the relationship I had with him, loved what he was doing. So after he changed roles and I reported to him for about 6 months, we continued the conversation. And funny enough, in 2018, 2019, when there was a position that was open, because our dialogue continued over those several years and that relationship continued, he actually considered me for the role that was happening at the time. So mentorship can be in many different ways. It doesn't have to be a direct, feed me some information, teach me this, teach me that. It could also be inspiration, right? Seeing other people's journey, what they're doing, how they're doing it, that can also be a good factor of it as well. So lots of different ways to leverage that, and absolutely encourage people to find or at least connect with people to mentor with and even give back, right? So people think that it has to be mentorship from a manager or a senior person. No, you're at a different stage in your career than someone else who's just starting out, right? Providing them the support, the encouragement, the direction, the guidance. There's so many factors. And mentorship is, you can learn from people that are junior from you, right? Even as a mentee, from that perspective, it doesn't have to necessarily be someone who's a senior. So great insights there. So we're going to switch it up a little bit, Rebecca. We're going to go into a rapid fire question. And this is the exciting part of the round where I'm going to ask you a few questions. The rules are going to be simple. You're going to respond with the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah. Okay. Ready to go?
Yes.
No pressure, right?
No, this is usually where I shine. My extroverted brain, I think very well on the spot, but then it's also the excitement of the moment. So yes, let's go.
All right, let's do this. Let's see how this goes. So the first one's easy. Tea or coffee?
Coffee, always. It's the only thing in life I'm actually snobby about.
Okay, we'll have to do a whole other segment on that one then. The book that has influenced your approach to leadership the most?
Ooh, good question. Truthfully, I was thinking of specific kind of self-development guides, but I'm actually going to default to Gallup's leadership, strength-based leadership. The foundation of that program was the catalyst moment for me finding my identity, both as an effective corporate employee, but truthfully as a leader. And regardless of everything that I've taken away from other books, that is the one that I reference the most. And I have brought into my leadership journey with others and from team to team the most frequently.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Your wake up time?
I'm not a morning person. 7 a.m. if I'm working from home, earlier if I have to go into the office.
Yeah, that's still a morning person from my perspective, I'll tell you that. But
I don't want to wake up at 7 a.m. and it's always with an alarm.
That's fair. Always with an alarm.
That's when I have to wake up.
Yeah. Yoga, meditation, or a power workout?
Yoga.
Yeah. Tech gadget you cannot live without?
Can I say phone? Is that too general?
No, I think not anymore.
Okay.
I mean,
I would definitely say my phone, but not just because it's my phone. I'm a little bit obsessed with it. I have the Pixel 7 Pro specifically because it has the macro lens. Hiking is my meditation. Hiking is my happy place. And I take a lot of pictures while I'm out hiking.
Oh,
and so
amazing.
The camera on my phone specifically is always with me.
All right, the camera on your phone. The top quality you look for in a team member?
Resilience, closely followed by effective communication.
Yeah. Okay. One change you hope to see in corporate cultures in the next 5 years?
I think a true understanding and embracing of the necessity of enabling true positive EX. We talk a lot about understanding it. We talk a lot about improving EX. it is tough when married with true corporate culture, with the pressures of the market, with the pressures of how just North American work culture. It's a bit of a dichotomy of acknowledging what it needs to look like and what it should be versus actually executing. So I think that for me would be my greatest wish, that if there could be an evolution where we move closer to a point where we understand how corporations can genuinely impact positively, balance, blend, and EX, that would be a change I would love to see.
I see a new role and a new custom title coming up for you. And my last question, Rebecca, if animals could talk, which would you want to have a conversation with?
If it was one animal, then I think it would just be my dog, because that would make the world a lot easier. If it was animals in general and I couldn't pick my pet, then I would probably say birds. They're everywhere. They see everything. And because I am in the forest hiking a lot, I feel like then I just always have some company and a way out. If I'm lost, I could just ask them.
Yeah, a way out if you're lost. I love that. Rebecca, thank you very much for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. It's been an absolute true pleasure. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to TTalks for more conversations with the leaders who are shaping your future. Until next time, keep on inspiring.